Good evening. My name is Kelly Bradley. I'm a professor in Educational Policy Studies and Evaluation, and I currently serve as chair of the department. We are thrilled to welcome you here tonight for this special event as part of our EPE Colloquium series. Everyone in this room knows John in their own way. I call him a mentor, a colleague, and most importantly, a friend. He's impacted us personally and professionally, and I think he will probably leave a legacy that will forever go unmatched. So I just want to share a few things before I welcome him up here. And lots of this you know, and I'll put in a couple of things as we go through. John writes about colleges and universities by connecting past and present. He often jokes when we're in dissertation defenses that he's the past and I'm the present. So we know he does that. He has a collegiate experience from being an athlete to the coach of so many dissertations. Last year, John was one of 6 historians who co-authored the brief for the Supreme Court case, the NCAA, and we've seen all of that come to fruition this year with the name, likeness, image, right? So he is involved in all of the current things. This is why he's on so many committees, and not just in our department, but college and university wide, because not only can you see him in the classroom, but you can see him on ESPN, maybe more than even some of the Wildcat players. So John's committed to balancing excellence in academics and athletics. At Brown University, he was a varsity wrestler. It's one of the things that he and I have been able to connect on over the years. Spotlight. Myself, I have a son who wrestled, and so often John and I exchange the great things that the sport teaches you. And I see lots of those qualities in my colleague. He perseveres. He's mentally and physically quite sound, right? And you're probably not going to win too many battles with him. And any of you in this room in different times have found that to be true. Some of his books in 2020, Forbes magazine selected his History of American Higher Education as one of the outstanding books of the year. And it's already reprinted 3 times, and it remains on the Johns Hopkins Press bestseller. We could do this all night, but what you all came for is what I want to give you, and so I'm going to turn this mic over to my esteemed colleague, Dr. John Thelin.
Thank you so much. I wish to thank the College of Education and our Department of Educational Policy Studies for inviting me to present the last lecture. It's a great honor, and it's a wonderful way for me to wrap up. So, thank you, and I thank to our Dean, Julian Vasquez-Halig, and to my chair, Professor Kelly Bradley, and to our planning committee that includes my colleagues, Professor Zitzi Miracore, Professor Kayla Johnson, Professor Joe Waddington, and to Cindy Bennett. I'm very indebted to our college's professional staff in media and communications. That would include Director Amanda Nelson, Director Beth Goins, and our Director of Philanthropy, Amy Baston. And special thanks to Eric Jarvis, whose hospitality and technical skill has made this wonderful facility available to us. Above all, my thanks to you, as former students, as colleagues, as alums, and friends. Over the last 26 years, you have made being at UK fulfilling. So thank you. So meanwhile, go back with me a little over 100 years as we rediscover the American campus from around 1900. Oops. Here I have the University of Chicago that opened in 1893. And I use that as a mooring point Because around the turn of the century, what happened is that colleges and universities were exciting. They were the theme parks of the late 19th and early 20th century, where families would visit to marvel at their towers, their laboratories, and also their landscape grounds with exquisite park benches. So the American campus captured both the American imagination and also headlines. Now, there was one journalist who was assigned to write about American higher education around this time. His name was Edward Slauson. And what happened with him is that he was assigned to go through budget reports, official pronouncements, and that's his hovel and paperwork at the side. But one day he became exasperated, said, we need more, we need different material to make these dry bones come to life. So what he did was he took off for a long visit, and he would visit campuses all over the country. And for the Independent magazine, which was a wide circulation national monthly publication, he would write a profile. And it was so popular that eventually it was turned into a book published in 1910 called Great American Universities. He provided me the inspiration for my approach to higher education. I came across his book as a graduate student at the University of California, Berkeley in 1970. And it literally changed my thinking and my feeling for American higher education. So I will try to help make these dry bones live. One of the problems is the campus is more than bricks and mortar. So what I use is the metaphor to see the campus as a stage set, not only for Hollywood film crews, but also for deans, donors, and advancement professionals. Go back to 1955. Here's a postcard aerial view of the University of Kentucky. No medical center, plenty of parking. And you'll notice, for example, Memorial Coliseum and the football stadium, all on the Avenue of Champions. What I learned, though, is that postcard manufacturers loved colleges and universities. They were one of the best-selling themes for sale, but they always sent their photographers early in the morning before anyone was there. So you don't really see many signs of life. So our challenge is to take this stage set and bring it to life. What I have here is a film crew from 1960. This is at Occidental College in Los Angeles. It's also, by the way, this was where Barack Obama went for his first 2 years of college. In fact, though, it was used for a movie starring Jane Fonda and Tony Perkins. But what we show is that we now have lights, camera, and action. So we still need a cast and a script. Here's our cast, the academic procession. Now if we can just keep them moving. Oops. Part of the procession, as my development officers tell me, you should always have a major donor. So I think it's a good idea to add John D. Rockefeller Sr. And as every president said to him, Mr. Rockefeller, you'll never walk alone. For our script, I have a strong fondness for view books. Somewhere around 8th grade, I switched from comic books to view books. Now I'd write away to colleges, from which I would later receive some of the finest rejection letters of all time. But I remember in 1963, I believe I was a sophomore in high school, and reading through the Harvard College view book, A Guy Can Dream, there was this kind of modest, understated passage. It says, age, like wealth, does not make a university great, but it helps. I think that's pretty good advice. So let's go down the historical list. All right, we have Harvard, which is the oldest, and the wealthiest. Let's go to the second oldest institution, William and Mary, and let's see how they pitch themselves. Oops, excuse me. Here's from the 1890s, William and Mary College, the oldest and cheapest college in the South. The graphics need a little work. I particularly like, it's a healthy climate. If you've ever visited Tidewater in the summer, where I think every mosquito family tends to vacation. Each college has this challenge to figure out where does it fit into this mix of age and wealth. Now, in contrast to William and Mary, that has age but no money, what we find is with our newer campuses that were created, let's say, in the 1920s or 1930s, they have a problem in that they don't have a heritage. They don't have alumni. So they have to try to create their own instant history. And here's one of my favorite examples. This is Westwood, now among the most expensive real estate in the world. At the time, though, when UCLA opened, it was just barren bean fields. And so the local boosters and donors paid a hefty amount to have a boulder imported. So they had their instant Founders Rock. So heritage was alive and well. Also in the late 1920s, the University of Pittsburgh made a dramatic entrance into campus architecture with the construction of what was called the Cathedral of Learning. And it was really one of the first academic buildings that used state-of-the-art I-beam construction and poured reinforced concrete. And it came to be known as Girder Gothic. Here we see it in construction. Now, what they don't tell you is that actually more important than construction was the innovation of elevators. So imagine being in the art history department and having a great view on the 17th floor, but having to use the stairs. The one thing with historic revival architecture is that the form did not always harmonize with the official function that the architects and the trustees had in mind. And here I have in mind Rockefeller Chapel, a spectacular cathedral, historic revival, Gothic, at the University of Chicago. What happens is that the president, Robert Maynard Hutchins, in the early 1930s, has a distinguished group of visitors, and he's showing them around, and they look at this beautiful facade of the Gothic cathedral. Then he takes them inside. Looking at his student body, or student bodies, he says, you know, I do believe that more souls have been conceived than saved within these walls. Further evidence that students create a world of their own. They transform buildings to their purposes, their functions. Jump ahead several decades into the mid-1960s. Go back to view books, as I mentioned. When the University of California, Santa Cruz was about to open, it was constructing a new campus in a beautiful setting of redwoods, Northern California by the ocean. But what happened was that construction was way behind. And so the public relations office and the admissions office, they had a panic. Like, how can we convey the beauty and appeal of our campus when we don't have the quadrangles and all the things that we hoped we would have? So what they told prospective students was, you'll be academic pioneers, living and learning in 20th century covered wagons. That was a euphemism. What happened was buildings and grounds quickly assembled trailers. And so here you have affluent families saying, yes, we're paying for our son and daughter to live in a trailer park. But instant history. In this era of university construction, a lot of times there were natural disasters and calamities. So in addition to construction, you also had destruction. And here was the beautiful, relatively new Stanford University after the San Francisco earthquake, where its monuments and its architecture took a tumble. But our colleges and universities have been resilient in responding to adversity and reconstructing. One of the innovations that made American higher education unique worldwide was our passion for college sports, also as spectator sports. Most noticeably, it was football. If you notice, for example, if you travel around the United States to older campuses, there was a flurry of stadium construction after World War I, usually in the early 1920s. And so that is why we have so many memorial stadiums, tributes to veterans, to those who had served, lost their lives in World War I. Now, the timing was very, very important because, for example, at Southern Methodist University, they waited till about 1929 to start construction of their new stadium. That was also the time when the stock market crashed, and they solved their financial problems. They paid for the stadium construction by garnishing faculty and staff wages. Now, a happier story is Sanford Stadium at the University of Georgia, between the hedges, still in use today. What was interesting is that the first game played there in October 1929, 1 week before the stock market crash, the University of Georgia invited Yale as their opponent. This was the first time that Yale had ever played a football game outside the Northeast. So you had the Georgia Bulldogs versus the Yale Bulldogs. A safe bet was that the Bulldogs would win. And which, by the way, the Georgia Bulldogs did win. And it was a very happy day. Indeed, it was a happy week because the president canceled classes for the rest of the week. Nary a professor or student complained. Now, having a great stadium and a great team can be a substantial investment. Caltech, those imaginative engineers, came up with another plan. Why do you have to have a winning team to go to the Rose Bowl? This is 1961. The newspapers reported that the University of Washington, the champion of the Pac-8 conference, would play against the Big Ten champion, the University of Minnesota. However, what over 30 million television viewers saw was at the Rose Bowl that indeed it was Caltech that carried the day. And so rather than hire a coach and a team and build a stadium, what they did was 14 engineering students sneaked into the student union building where the University of Washington card stunts instructions were held, and they changed literally hundreds of individual sheets so that nobody knew that then Caltech would make a guest appearance at the Rose Bowl. Still considered one of the finer college pranks of all time. Now, one problem with stadiums and other facilities, laboratories or whatever, is universities change over time in terms of their functions and what they're good at, what they're less good at. Interesting is that the University of Chicago was actually a founding member of the Big Ten Conference in the mid-1890s and often was a conference champion. And there was one stretch for over 30 years. They filled every home game. And if you look at the stadium, it's once again this kind of historic revival using castle turrets and whatever. Now, however, at some point, their football fortunes declined. And what happened was, eventually, in 1938, they lost 61-0 to Harvard, and the next week they dropped football. So the stadium falls into neglect, and you can see weeds and shrubs and whatever. But always, always keep in mind the resilience of American colleges and universities to adapt their campus and their facilities to new forms and functions. So this is 1939, and things look pretty grim. But if we go a few years forward into the mid-1940s, the stadium was recycled to serve another purpose during World War II. The locker rooms became the secret site of the federal government's research lab of the Manhattan Project, an all-American squad of physicists, scientists, mathematicians. The University of Kentucky joins with a number of other universities as a land-grant institution. And that's a very, very important part of our American higher education heritage. One characterization of it came from Norman Rockwell. This is a Saturday Evening Post cover. By the way, the original oil painting was found about 10 years ago being used as wall insulation in a Pennsylvania farmhouse, and it sold for $5 million. Not the house, but the painting. So, right, but what's fascinating about Norman Rockwell's cover is that it conveys the idea that from our rural past, we have the hardworking father who's a farmer or a rancher. He never had the opportunity to go to college, but his son does. And if you look, for example, on the suitcase with the decal, it says State U. And the son is looking away, looking toward the new campus. So it in some ways characterizes the prospect of one's children having a chance to go to college, of upward mobility, and connecting higher education to our American public. Now, as for Lassie, I don't know. Maybe she was going to the vet school, part of the land-grant mission. Here's from the University of Illinois, part of this great land-grant tradition. These are the Morrow plots, America's oldest experimental field, established in 1876. Results demonstrate that soil quality is a vital component of agricultural productivity. Interesting story about how heritage becomes part of a living modern university. Back in the late 1970s, the university planned to build a new 8-story library adjacent to the Morrow plots. But there was an objection that the new structure, the shadows of the new 8-story structure, would infringe on the sunlight and shade, and that it would change all the data on crop production. So the accommodation was they built a 1-story library with a subterranean 3 underground stories to maintain the heritage and sanctity of the land-grant plot. The Land-Grant Act helped to make our colleges of agriculture among the most prominent and prosperous in our American universities. And so many of their buildings were just superb, and they were often called the People's Palace. This is Hillgard Hall at the University of California, Berkeley. And if you read in the marble inscription across the top, it says, "To rescue for human society the natural values of rural life." So this was indicative of how our newer universities, our state universities, our land-grant institutions, they were taking their place in the academic procession. They were unapologetic. They're great sources of state pride. One of the attractions of the Land-Grant Act was that it would help to make state colleges and universities integral to the state economy. They were going to be practical, a strong emphasis on applied science and research connected to the economy and industry of the state. Here I have from 1904, 1905, from our own Commonwealth of Kentucky, from the Bureau of Agriculture, Labor, and Statistics. The big news was the fertilizer law. What it does, it licenses the College of Agriculture to be responsible for sorting, sifting, sniffing, fertilizer to make sure that it's commercially ready for sale. Now, some have said that this truly demonstrated that our land-grant colleges were integral to the BS degree. And with the great success, the PhD really did mean piled higher and deeper. Oops. There's another dimension. Usually when we think of the land-grant legacy, we think of agriculture and mechanics, mechanics meaning engineering. It also meant mining and also military. From time to time, I step outside of my office and I look up at the main building. This was a pre-COVID anecdote. And it would seem like on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, there would be ROTC drill going across. Then on Tuesday, Thursday, civil engineering. Thanks to the land-grant curriculum, we have in front of the main building the best protected, most surveyed land in the Northern Hemisphere. But there is another serious side to the land-grant legacy, particularly in its early decades. It was very skewed in terms of what it offered in terms of curriculum and who studied, who had access to programs. Lesser known than, say, engineering or agriculture was that home economics was actually one of the thriving and important courses of study. However, it did not have the stature or power or prestige of some of the other fields. And it was very, very split by gender. For example, the first director of the home economics department at the University of California, Berkeley, was Dr. Agnes Faye Morgan. She was the first woman to receive a PhD from the University of Chicago, and it was in the field of chemistry. So she was a very, very excellent scientist. Her own research in terms of nutrition and other applied sciences gained international renown and respect. However, she failed whenever she tried to make the home economics curriculum rigorous with more math requirements, more science. She was always deflected and defeated by her dean. So what we have as a result for many, many decades is that some departments, those usually enrolling women and where women taught, were confined to the academic kitchen. It's very hard to think of the American campus without attention and awe for monuments and memorials. It has attracted a great deal of attention in recent years, and here's one of my favorites. This is from 2018. This is the unveiling of the Richard Greener statue at the University of South Carolina. The backstory to this is it was completely an initiative of students and faculty in the higher education program. And they worked for about 4 or 5 years doing research, finding out about Richard Greener, and his story is very, very important. He was the first African American to be a professor at the University of South Carolina. This is in the late 19th century during Reconstruction. He also was the first African American to receive the Bachelor of Arts degree from Harvard. He would also go on to be an ambassador and whatever. But he had essentially been forgotten from the institutional memory until this group of students resurrected his biography. They lobbied, they campaigned, they worked with donors, they worked with the administration, they worked with the community, they worked with the African American community, the NAACP. And here was the happy result, the unveiling of his statue. What's interesting is that the statue is adjacent to the Thomas Cooper Library. The reason that placement is interesting, albeit often forgotten, Thomas Cooper was the president of the University of South Carolina in the early 1800s. He taught generations of students, many of whom would go on into the US Senate from many, many southern states. He emphasized oratory and the ability to speak, and states' rights and nullification theory. So here we have a juxtaposition of the two polarities of our American social and political and racial heritage from the 19th century, sharing our campus. I mentioned football stadiums a little bit a while ago, and I say that college sports, of course, are central not only to our notion of going to college, but also connecting American social history with race relations. This is Jesse Owens. Now, they say that it's the Ohio State University, but that jersey got a little rough to do. So this is the Cliff Notes version. This is Jesse Owens in 1935. He broke something like 6 records at the Big Ten track meet. Right. What's important about Jesse Owens is that in 1936, at the Munich Olympics, he will win 4 gold medals for the United States. And this was particularly important because the games were hosted by Chancellor Adolf Hitler, who at that time was trying to showcase the Olympics as the trophy case of Aryan athletes. Jesse Owens spoiled his party. Now, important sequel is that back home in the United States, Jesse Owens becomes a genuine national hero, celebrated, applauded. The story that connects higher education in a disconcerting way is that when Jesse Owens was a student at Ohio State, he was not allowed to live in the dormitories, nor was he allowed to eat in the dining halls. So an important legacy, along with sports and opportunity and achievement, is that also there were shortfalls, that are assimilation and acceptance of newcomers and new groups into racially exclusive institutions was slow and incomplete. Another part of the college sports and American opportunity saga is that often those colleges and universities that did pursue racial integration often paid a heavy price for it. Here's a team that pretty much forgotten. The 1951 University of San Francisco Dons. They were undefeated, ranked by many sports writers as one of the very top football teams in the nation. And what happened in December of 1951, they did receive a bid from the Orange Bowl to be one of the teams that played. However, it carried one non-negotiable condition, and that was the University of San Francisco was not permitted to bring its black players. And you'll see in there's Ollie Matson and Bert Tolar in the middle row. The entire squad and coaching staff took 15 seconds to vote unanimously to turn down the bid. I wish there were a happy ending, but in fact there was not. The University of San Francisco was very much a commuter, working class, Jesuit, urban university. It did not have a large endowment. It was ethnically diverse, racially diverse. They had very little money. It was hard for them to compete against, let's say, the Big Ten and the Southeast Conference or whatever. They were counting on the revenues from the Orange Bowl to pay their bills for football. By forfeiting that income, they had to drop football. So that is kind of the mixed blessings and message of college sports. Here we go to the Southeast Conference. And once again, my theme is that often in the United States, we have had admission, but admission has not necessarily been followed by full citizenship and full participation of African American student athletes. You were not allowed to participate. So for example, the University of Kentucky will desegregate racially in the late 1940s. But in the Southeast Conference, we have over on this screen is Perry Wallace in 1967. He will be the first African American player in varsity basketball in the Southeast Conference. He plays for Vanderbilt. He was from a local Nashville family. His parents very much wanted him to stay close to home, to be part of their community, and so he chose to go to Vanderbilt. He was an engineering major, graduated with honors, and was a star player for Vanderbilt for 3 seasons. He was drafted very high by the National Basketball Association. Instead of playing pro basketball, however, he decided to go to Columbia Law School. He then taught for over 30 years as a distinguished professor of law at George Washington University, and he died in 2017. But he stands as one of our student athlete pioneers. Familiar to us on Avenue of Champions, from 1969, the 4 players, student athletes from the University of Kentucky, who become the first African American players in football in the Southeast Conference. So there's progress, but progress is often slow and incomplete. This is Wilma Rudolph. She overcame barriers not only of race, but also gender as a student athlete. She was from Nashville. She attended Nashville State, a historically black college, and was part of an incredible women's track team called the Tiger Bells. They had no track. They had to beg and borrow to practice at a local high school track. They paid for their own uniforms. This also was at a time when the National Collegiate Athletic Association did not sponsor women's intercollegiate athletics. So they would arrange their own competition, the Amateur Athletic Union or whatever. It was a very, very hard, impoverished existence for these dedicated student athletes. She started at Tennessee State in 1958. Here she is in 1960. She is the first woman athlete to win 3 gold medals. This is at the Rome Olympics. So once again, an example of overcoming adversity, but it was hard, once again, both in terms of race and gender. A true American hero. What a difference time makes. I have here 2 photographs that, from some of my colleagues in quantitative research, I've tried to follow systematic research design. Let's see how the variables, I keep them constant. Here we have Chris von Salza, and on this screen, Katie Ledecky. Similarities. Each and both will win several gold medals right after they graduated from high school in the Olympics. Each will enroll at Stanford, but in very different years. Chris von Salza enrolls in 1960, Katie Ledecky in 2016. There the similarities tend to end. Chris von Salza did not swim in college sports, athletics. Stanford simply had no women's team. They had no women's sports. So, at the age of 18, with Olympic gold medals, her college career, it was over before it started. And that was, quote, the name of the game. Interesting, she majored in Asian history, and she would go on to be one of the pioneering computer scientists in what we now know as Silicon Valley. But swimming was suddenly gone. In contrast, Katie Ledecky, at 18, enters Stanford. I think it was 2017 that she enters. also an excellent student. She will end up being selected to be a research assistant for Stanford's psychology department. Her opportunities were very, very different than Chris von Salza. Katie will lead Stanford to 2 National Collegiate Athletic Association women's swimming championships. She'll win numerous gold medals, NCAA medals, and then for the next Olympics she will return winning yet even more gold medals for the United States. So it's an example of academic and athletic opportunity and excellence coming together. The other interesting addition is that she does not swim on the Stanford varsity team her senior year. She has a very deliberate reason to change her plans. That is because she signs a contract with Speedo sports uniform manufacturing for $10 million. The rest is history. But it does, the important note, it does show what a difference in this like 40 or 50 year span, how measures such as Title IX from 1972 slowly but gradually truly did transform the kinds of opportunities that our colleges and universities would offer for women as well as for men in intercollegiate sports. Interesting, in the 1960s, so much attention to student unrest, students' rights, reforming the campus. But in fact, if you read through the accounts, that the idea of opportunity for women really, really is far down on the list. And it's not until the late 1960s that there's much of a concerted, organized effort. Now, for example, if you look at the array of institutions that were single gender in the late 1960s, and so for example, in the Ivy League, Dartmouth, Yale, Princeton were all men. So there was a push, campaigns, initiatives to consider admitting women. And there was one dean at Princeton in 1968. He just unabashedly said, "Keep the damn women out." He did not succeed, but once again, it was very, very slow progress. Now, the interesting sequel, if we go from, let's say, 1968 or 1969, probably by around 1972 or 1973, we're going to see great gains in what had been all men's institutions becoming coeducational. One of my favorite academic pioneers is Hannah Holborn Gray. She was professor of history and provost at Yale. She was passed over as a candidate for president of Yale. She was, in 1978, however, named president of the University of Chicago. Now, many of you are too young to remember the late 1970s. It was what was called higher education's new depression, except it wasn't new, it was getting kind of old. 16% inflation, all kinds of deferred maintenance or whatever. What I liked about Hannah Holborn Gray is that she was able to keep a sense of humor and wit even amidst adversity. So usually, you know how you see photographs of like trustees and presidents wearing construction helmets and shovels, you know, like, watch us grow, and they're shoveling, you know, the big construction. Hannah Holborn Gray had the misfortune of being president of a university when they didn't have any money for new construction. So what she did, instead of the ritual photos of groundbreaking for a new building, she would make a ceremony and a festivity out of budget cutting. Now, it's interesting to go back to the situation facing the Ivy League institutions, many of which had been all male as students. It's interesting, I believe it was by about 2006, 5 of the 8 Ivy League universities, women were president. So that's substantial. It's in complete change, but it's still substantial change within our own lifetime. Here we have, for example, Ruth Simmons. Became president of Brown in 2001 and would serve as president for 12 years. She was the daughter of sharecroppers from Texas. She went to Dillard University in New Orleans, historically black college, received her master's and PhD in French literature from Harvard, would go on to be professor at Princeton and also associate provost. Then she would be named president of Smith College in Massachusetts, and then in 2001, president of Brown University. And it's interesting, one of her first acts as president was to establish a committee that looked at the heritage of Brown University and its connections with slavery. So it was kind of way ahead of the curve in terms of consciousness and awareness, and incorporating that truly into the life stream of the university. Here we are close to home. This is Sarah Blanding. About 2 or 3 years ago, the University of Kentucky tore down Blanding Tower, far, far away. Interesting, I had some students who had lived in Blanding Towers, and they had reunions, and they had these great stories about, like, there was one washing machine in the basement for the entire, but they said it made for great parties. But anyway, but what's interesting, so architecture is important to our colleges and universities, but so we construct monuments to heroes, donors, famous people, or whatever, but also the question is, what happens when you deconstruct, when you tear down a building? What happens to that person that you honored? And so I think it's important that we keep Sarah Blanding in our institutional memory. Now, when she was at the University of Kentucky, she was professor of political science. She was dean. She also was the women's basketball coach. So she's a native of Kentucky. She did her graduate work at Columbia University and London School of Economics. So she had really, really strong credentials and experience. She leaves the University of Kentucky in 1941 to become the first woman to be an academic dean, and this is at Cornell University in upstate New York. A little bit later, in 1947, in 1946, she is named president of Vassar College. Then in 1947, United States President Harry Truman appoints a blue ribbon commission to do this massive analysis and study of democracy in American higher education, kind of a blueprint for where, in the decades following World War II, where American higher education might go. And I believe there were 25 members of this commission. There were 2 women appointed. One of them was Sarah Blanding. So it's an example. I think it's very important that we keep in mind that our local heroes also have a national presence. Here's one of my favorite academic heroes. This is Laura Nader. She joined the University of California, Berkeley faculty in 1960. And she was one of like 5 women who were in tenure-eligible faculty appointments, a very, very small group. She was an anthropologist. She also had a younger brother, still has, a younger brother named Ralph, and she made sure that he studied and stayed out of politics. But Laura Nader was very resourceful and determined. It bothered her that she was not able to attend faculty meetings at Berkeley, even though she was a member of the faculty. The catch-22 on that was that the faculty meetings were held in the faculty club. The faculty club is this beautiful shingle craftsman building, was privately incorporated, and it was exclusive to men. So, of course, therefore, women could not attend, even though they were members of the faculty. Laura Nader was not to be denied. Before one meeting, she saw that there was a bathroom window, men only, that was open. And so she had a colleague, another woman, hoist her up. And so she goes in through the bathroom window and liberates the faculty meeting. And the rest is history. But interesting, she would have courses on anthropology and health. And they would get at Berkeley the largest auditorium they had. And it was still never enough. She would have her lecture classes would usually be standing room only. People who weren't enrolled would come by, just to listen to her. She also would be a leader in rights for women as faculty, and she was responsible, for example, for acquiring for women professors maternity leave. And she's still going strong. It says the last lecture. What they didn't tell you, there is another American tradition to which all of you are heirs and participants. That is the long lecture. And how to endure it. Here's one strategy which I can tell many of my graduate students already identify across the centuries with that. But it is important to remember that undergraduates create their own world, and that they often see the curriculum and courses as kind of like, that's the broccoli before the dessert. But you're allowed to nod off. Now, I think I've missed. Yes, right. We've talked about building and growth and great architecture. Around 1960, after about a decade or so after World War II, the incredible not only expansion of our population, but also coming from the 1947 Truman Commission report, where we mentioned Sarah Blanding, there was this national inspiration and commitment to sending a state and a nation to college. And the idea that, for example, in 1910, probably 5% of 18-year-olds went to college. By 1970, that percentage is going to go up to about 60%. So it's a massive, substantial progression and increase, all the more impressive because the number of young adults or late adolescents is increasing also. So this incredible growth. And this is the Time magazine cover from 1960, saluting Clark Kerr, president of the University of California. And they called him the master planner. It was the idea of how do you accommodate and encourage a new generation of students that persuade them and their families that college is possible, college is affordable. And he did so with a great deal of success, but also a great deal of controversy. He would be, during his presidency, American universities, especially Berkeley, would gain international acclaim for outstanding PhD programs, graduate studies. At the same time, overcrowding and other discontents led to tensions that, so on the one hand, as president, he would enjoy great success, but then also great problems close to home. He also had his differences with state politicians, and the governing board of the University of California is called the Regents of the university. It's also been called the world's largest unhappy family. They sue each other between meetings. Well, anyway, 1967, Governor Ronald Reagan, who's a member of the Regents, is leading a discussion, and Clark Kerr is kind of called on the carpet. And so then he leaves the conference room, and reporters ask him, well, President Kerr, what's happened? What's going on in there? Because he left the meeting early. And he says, well, I came into the presidency the way I left it, fired with enthusiasm. So, mixed fortunes of our great leaders. Now, one thing in this era, much of the media coverage tends to go to the prestigious colleges and universities in the Northeast, the Midwest, and the Pacific Coast. The South really is a good idea gone south. It's kind of left out. But this starts to change around 1980. I think as the Southern economy starts to grow, and there's also a discovery and appreciation for our homegrown colleges and universities and their heritage throughout the South. I do my research 24/7. This was while I was sitting in a dentist office in 1983 reading Southern Living. Good footnotes. But anyway, but I loved the theme of it. Walk through history on campus. The South's varied college campuses speak individually of time and place and of generations who have walked the quadrangles. Fall is a fine time to read their storied facades. And it goes through, this is University of South Carolina and their famous, the Horseshoe, but it goes through about 15 Southern universities. And the thing that was great is they had, for months, they'd have these letters to the editors, the irate alumni writing in, yes, but you didn't include my alma mater. So it was the idea that the South had arrived. It had its place. An increasing number of Southern universities were invited to be members of the Association of American Universities, the preeminent group of about 60 research universities. So there was this justifiable regional pride. So now you could pick among many institutions, who would you celebrate, who would you salute? Let me just select one. The University of Georgia. It's actually, in fact, the oldest state university. And they have this ongoing debate and rivalry with University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill for that award. But it's the idea that the South, not only did it have robust universities in the 20th century, it had heritage as well. And one of the monuments that works into the annual renewal is that the dean addresses the entering freshman class in front of the arch. He points in one direction. He says, if you want fries with that, go to the Golden Arches. If you want an education, come to the Arch. And that is their campus monument. Now, that makes students feel dedicated and whatever. Now, one thing we forget is that colleges and universities actually have great power over our business community and corporations. And that actually, usually, sometimes you hear that, well, why can't a college be run like a business? But businesses often say, why can't a business look like a college? So let's take this theme of the arch. Here we have, outside of Chicago, McDonald's Hamburger University. State of the art. They probably have a climbing wall, I guess. But it is the idea that our industrial parks have often looked to academe for their architecture and design. Put aside laboratories, football stadiums, libraries, parking. Parking is the issue. I welcome you to drive around UK without a pass and try to find a parking space, and you'll come back in about 3 hours and agree with me, but your car will be towed. But all right, so no, every campus goes through this ongoing discussion and debate as to who should have priority. Or residential campuses will say, should we allow students to have a car at all? Because after all, we are a residential campus. Well, at Berkeley, the vice president for research and development got together with the director of parking. They came up with the most incredible incentive plan. Now, Faculty colleagues, take note. All you have to do is win the Nobel Prize, and you will have a free reserved parking space in the center of campus. Now, actually, there was dissent. The mathematicians were miffed. Actually, it's something stronger than that. Because there's no Nobel Prize offered in mathematics. So they say, hey, we would have had it. I've talked about construction, celebration, the success story of our universities going back to 1890 or so. But I'd also add that a strength of the American university is that the loyalty and support and belief that our campuses inspire in our students, faculty, staff, alumni, it includes how do we respond to adversity. Earlier, seemed like 3 hours ago, I was talking about how I would look out my corridor window at the main building. Well, go back to early May 2001. About 4 o'clock in the afternoon, several graduate students had come by my office, and we were standing in the corridor this beautiful, beautiful spring day. And we were chatting and looking, and then suddenly it looked like snowflakes. It was strange. Like, what is going on here? It was just bizarre. Eventually, we pieced together, and by looking further across the main, is the main building was on fire. This is an interesting story. This was the final day of a massive historic renovation project, and the young welder catches the spark on an old wooden beam or whatever. To me, though, and if you see, this is probably about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 4 or 5, and you start to see some people gathered sparsely in front of the building. Going into evening, the crowd grew. And there was this kind of a quiet, soft reverence. But at the same time, people would meet strangers, and they would talk among themselves. And so you would have, for example, some octogenarian talking to a 19-year-old, and they're talking about how they both had failed organic chemistry or whatever. But there was this genuine, like, people stayed. And so some would come and go, but the crowd grew larger. And so that many stayed till late at night and into the early morning. And to me, it helped to make the University of Kentucky my home, because it was a collective and shared experience. And it was not just victories, but it was also adversity that bonded us together into this respect and admiration, and also resolution to recover from this. So I think that both individually, this impact on me, but also I think collectively, it does show the importance of universities. And also, if you look at their entire heritage, floods, fires, financial problems, or whatever, it is their ability to endure and survive, propelled by the allegiance and loyalty and affection, not only of students and alums, but of also the local townspeople and community. I started out, I had the film crew at Occidental College, so I used something of the Hollywood motif. And so, of course, I looked to Hollywood for maybe this is the ideal professor to which I have aspired. This is Groucho Marx in 1932 in the movie Horse Feathers. Interesting thing, the Marx brothers, none of them graduated from high school. So of course they get tenure as professors. But I thought, well, maybe this is the image. This is what I should try to be as a professor in my career. I was intrigued by that, but on final balance, I said, no, that's not for me. So I kept searching for who are my ideals. What is the professor that I would hope to be? I found him. This is Jeremy Bentham, famous philosopher. in the late 18th and early 19th century. In addition to his fame as a scholar and philosopher, he's very involved in parliament and whatever. He was one of the founders and donors to what would be University College of London in the early 19th century. And he makes a gift to the university. But he had one condition. The term of his bequest was that he would be required and allowed to attend forever and ever, perpetuity. I've always wanted to use that word, perpetuity, every university faculty meeting. The university signed off on it. So, to this day, since the early 19th century, mid-19th century, they wheel in a glass case his embalmed but well-dressed corpse. And the faculty secretary signs into the ledger, Dr. Bentham, in attendance, did not speak, did not vote. And he also had donated. So I say, there's the ideal professor. So you've been patient. You've followed the sleeping politely. The academic procession has been very good to me. I thank you as colleagues, as former students, as friends, alums, and it's time for me to get back into the procession and say thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So at the beginning, John, you and Sharon were joking with me about streaming. You kind of crashed the internet tonight. You had over 600 people wanting to join that online. We finally got the sound running, but we've got it recorded, but they were able to finally get you. But congratulations. Not only did you fill the room, filled it online. So we're just we have a couple small gifts. One small gift and meaningful and maybe a little larger. I do want to just thank real quick, and John did, but the staff, Eric and his staff here at Esports, our communications team, Amanda, Nelson, and Beth Goins, they always come through for us. Our Associate Dean, Margaret Moore Schroeder, saved the day with the sound, so I'm going to acknowledge that. Thank you. She saves a lot of things. Did it again. Our EPE community, our College of Ed leadership team, Cindy Bennett, our DSS, she's out there getting the food ready that we're going to move to. And most of all, I'd like to thank the co-chairs of this event, Dr. Zitzi Meriker and Dr. Kayla Johnson. And I'm going to turn it over to Kayla for one special gift and then one more thing.
All right, well, I am Dr. Kayla Johnson, and I have had the pleasure of having John as both a professor and now a colleague. And so many of us know John's incredible legacy through his scholarship. Many of us have read his books, we've cited his work, many of us have taught his work. But there is another important legacy that we also all know, and that is the impact that you have left on us as a colleague, a friend, a coach, a professor, and so much more. And so we would like to gift this book to you, which is a compilation of notes of appreciation from many of us in this room and many of us online. And so just a little something so you know exactly the impact that you have had on all of us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, and now before we head out to the food, so this is going to be the last time you have to hear me this evening, so that might deserve a round of applause. I'm going to turn the floor over to our Director of Philanthropy. I have trouble with that word, anyone knows that. I do like to help raise money, but I struggle with that word. Miss Amy Baston, and our Dean, Dr. Julian Heilig Vasquez, for a special presentation.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you for all of you that are here in the room. Thank you also to everyone that joined us for this last lecture. I'm Julian Vasquez-Heilig, the Dean of the college, and we have a couple quick remarks. First, Coach T, thank you so much for your years of scholarly work. I've only had 3 years to get to know you, but every time I see you, you have a joke, and you're always well-dressed. So it's good. It's good to have met you, and you've made us so proud and put the University of Kentucky College of Education on the map with your work. Every week, I think this man is on CNN. So you brought to life the history of higher education and the importance of philanthropy and sport in that context. Thank you. And I have something that many people that love you, students and colleagues who are grateful for the many ways you have mentored them, you've partnered with them to make their professional and personal dreams come true. And many of those are in this room, and many of them have traveled so far to share this moment with you. So I am so pleased to present you with the first installment of the Coach John Thelin Faculty Endowment.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
And this is just the beginning. I know so many of you have made commitments to this professorship, and we have some way to go. We want to build this up to be the John Thelin Professorship. Let me switch pages here. And so to that end, there are envelopes on the registration table in the reception area. So I would like to invite you to consider a gift to this professorship that will live on infamy. I don't know, is that a word? Infamy? I think so. Famous. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So we're so glad, so please consider that gift. And then I wanted to do something special from our family. So I bought you a sweatshirt. It says Louisville on it. Now, what I want, this is audience participation, okay? I also have a pen here. And I would like everyone here to sign this sweatshirt so that on a nice, cold Kentucky evening, you can cuddle up on the fire with your signed sweatshirt. So thank you so much, and congratulations to you.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you.
You want to remark? You want to say anything else? Anything else? Okay. So we're going to sign the sweatshirt. We have receptions out there, time to talk with Dr. Thelin. If you would just join me one more time and send him out the way he deserves it.